Good morning to you guys, October 1st, 2025. And Steve, once again, thank you reminding us of grace this morning. And of course, the needs within our group were reminded of those things. And so let's enter in our study from that perspective of grace. Few of us were chatting prior to our hymn and joint time together. Um, Bill was talking about a book that he's reading called A Better Way to Read the Bible, and he was sharing that with us, and he highly recommends it. Um, but the point is there's different ways of reading the scriptures, and we're at one of those right here in verse 8, John 18:38. We're actually going to talk about it a little bit this morning. And we don't all read it the same. And that is verifiably true through 2,000 years of church history, let alone what was built upon in the Old Testament scriptures as introduced in the first century through the various groups of Jewish followers and interpretations of how they viewed the scriptures. It's just built within living. And what is very true is how we approach John 18:38. And of course, there's a whole background behind that, but I'll explain that a little bit. Pilate's statement, what is truth? And let's dive into that. Here's the text in verse 38. Pilate said to Jesus, what is truth? Now that's coming right on the heels of a statement that I'll quote here in just a little bit to build context. After saying this, Pilate went out to the Jews. Remember, he's moving in and out within the praetorium and without the praetorium. And the reason is because the religious Jewish leaders would not go into that defiled place. So Pilate is finding himself vacillating from in and out. And you see that really exclusively in John's gospel. And so he went out to the Jews and he said publicly, I find no grounds at all for charges in his case. I put emphasis on at all. There are no grounds, absolutely zero grounds for any type of charge in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I have depicted Pilate with the help of Chat GPT like this. I first had him in a robe in a New Testament setting on the steps of the Praetorium. The finger pointing to him is of the Jewish leaders, but I cropped this particular picture. And of course, I put Pilate in a modern business suit uh, just because I wanted to. And with Chat GPT, you can do that kind of stuff. So to me, it's more communicative of who he was in the public eye, and I think it's more correlative of that. So that's why I chose to put him in a suit. So this is my rendition or ChatGPT's rendition of how I uh, prompted Chat to render Pilate. And we'll use this image and different images in regard to this as we proceed. Now, how Pilate is perceived. So this is my rendition of Pilate. And this goes back to how we differ in how we read this entire interaction between Pilate and Jesus. And I did some research again through AI. And in my very simple research, and it could be, I think it's somewhat accurate, about 75% of the commentators on John frame Pilate's question, especially what is truth, as a flippant, cynical, or dismissive. The idea being that he is not in any way engaged. Now he's feeling pressure, but he is not engaged, and he just wants to get rid of this. Now there is some truth to that, but there are 25% of the commentators who read it slightly different. And that is, at least Pilate to some degree is listening, and there is an engagement going on between Pilate and a dialogue between Pilate and Jesus, and that his phrase, "what is truth," is not a flippant dismissal, but is actually an interaction between Jesus of Nazareth. I land in the second phase. I'm by far the minority, but I'm interpreting this entire passion scene from the 25% perspective, and it has to do with my understanding of what is going on. And so I'm not alone, but I'm in the minority. And so what you'll be hearing is from that perspective. And then, of course, you can vote however you want to go or ask questions. And we can actually, that would be really interesting to talk back and forth if you feel the need to do that. So that's how Pilate is perceived. The word villain is used quite frequently, that he's a villain, he's hard as nails, and he's not interacting, and I take a different position. Now, here is my brief justification why I hold that particular view, and I've got some points here. Number one, within John, and guys got to understand that the Apostle John recording John's gospel account is very different than the Synoptics. In the Synoptics, Jesus, it's way shorter. There is a lot more detail here, and it would be easier to arrive at that conclusion of the 75% just reading the Synoptics. Jesus is got a zipped lip. He doesn't say anything, and it's primarily the focus is on what is happening to Jesus. This is very different in John because we actually have a dialogue. We have interaction going on as recorded in John and not in the Synoptics. So it's not my mission to compare. It's my mission to teach John's gospel account as I understand it. So that's why we're focusing in John only, because I think John had something to say, as the other gospels as well. So, number one, right after Jesus says, "Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice," that's verse 37. Pilate immediately asks, "What is truth?" That tells me there is a dialogue happening. Jesus mentions truth in verse 37. Pilate responds with a truth question. And now it's still yet what he means by this, and we'll get to that in verse 38. So I think that shows engagement, not dismissal. Number two, the Greek phrasing used in number one above is open-ended, and it can carry sarcasm, as 75% of the commentators say, but it can also mean reflectiveness, weariness, searching tone. It can't be proved on a Greek word or phrase. So that's kind of open-ended. Number three, Pilate immediately declares, "I find no guilt in him." Verse 38b, this is his verdict, and I believe it's based on listening, not dismissal. If he were flippantly dismissing, there would be no reason to declare Jesus innocent. It would just be, let's crucify him. Let's get it done. But there isn't a level of engagement in this man's life. He's being touched by the person of Jesus of Nazareth as recorded, as I understand it, in John's gospel account. Pilate holds multiple um, there's number 5. Pilate holds multiple conversations with Jesus, verses 33 through 38. That's the in and the out. They're going back and forth. That's recorded in those verses, showing, and this shows and reinforces continual engagement rather than instant dismissal. If he was dismissing, why wouldn't he just, it would just be brief, short, let's get on with it. So the very length of the narrative shows engagement. Number 5, in John's gospel account, this is the this would point to the overall gospel account as John writes the story. John's gospel account, outsiders often stumble towards truth. And an example of that would be Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman. And I'm just saying, well, Pilate may fit within this pattern, a really unlikely kind of individual seeking truth. So those are my points. And so this is how I see it. And this is in direct reference. We're going to actually go back. I think we're going to, no, never mind. I spoke too soon. Oh, yeah, we are. Steve mentioned the foundation from last week, and I'm going to refer to that. I think Pilate, this is how I see this. I think Pilate is conflicted. That means he's got opposing things happening within him. And it's often the case how we find ourselves as people, being human. He's caught between his duty as the Roman official in that area, what he feels is right, Jesus' innocence, and fear for his own life, fear of going out of favor with Pilate or with Caesar. And so there's a lot of dynamics going on in this guy's body and head. And so in order to, this is my interpretation of what he's saying about truth. So we go back to last week's diagram, and what I showed last week was setting up for this week, that there is a foundation of objective truth, and there is our view, our interaction with what is true, and we do so through our filters, our biases, and our beliefs, and the outflow of that is the top actions. And we call this a belief structure, of which every human being has one, whether they can articulate it or how they can articulate it or not. Our actions are built on beliefs, biases, and filters. And somewhere down at the bottom, there's some sort of truth that we base it on. And that's just the human experience. Okay, so I created this image to hopefully to create understanding of maybe a why he asked the question, what is truth? Okay, so here's my reasoning, right or wrong. I think Pilate, this is me speaking, I think Pilate is engaged, as already shown, and that he's actually grappling with the distinction between objective truth and subjective experience. I don't think his question is just a philosophical, ethereal kind of question that has no bearing to reality, far from the truth. He's responding to what Jesus is saying, and he asks what is truth. I think he's saying, what is really true, objective reality versus my engagement as I try to filter what is actually true and what is it I think it's true based on filters, biases, belief, and action. Now, Pilate would not depict it like this, but if he were in our room, I'd ask him, is this what you were thinking? And so it's not just this big, wide question. He's saying what is actually objectively real and what is deciphering between what I think is true through filters, biases, and beliefs. And so that is where how I interpret the question, what is truth? He's grappling with what is really real. What is really real here? Because he knows human propensity to blend all this together. By golly, it's true. Well, is it really? It's true because I think it's true. Well, that's subjective experience. And there is it's wise to think about that. What is really true here and what is my interpretation, my feeling because of my filters, biases, and beliefs. So that is how I answer the question, how I view the question, what is truth? He's asking, okay, when what is truth, he's really asking, what's the difference between what is objective truth, regardless of my uh, belief in it, and what is a part of my experience? Thus, the question, what is truth? So that's how I understand it, the way he's asking it. Now, his verdict comes out of that. Asked the he asked the truth question. He doesn't wait around, it says, for a response. They don't get into a dialogue, although they have been dialoguing, Jesus and Pilate. But after he says this, maybe that's why a lot of people say it's a flippant response. I don't know. But after saying this, he goes out to the Jews outside the praetorium and he says, I find, this is his verdict, folks. This is it. I find no grounds at all for charges in his case. Thus, Pilate's words stand not as dismissal, this is my view, but as formal declaration. I would call this a formal declaration of Jesus's innocence spoken by an official representative of the most powerful governmental authority upon the earth at this time in history. This is how I theologically cast what is going on here. This is a statement. Pilate represents at this moment all of humanity in an official Roman sense, and he's declaring publicly, I find no ground at all for charges in his case. Now, this is a very big deal in regard to how I understand where Jesus is going on the cross and the following events. That he is declaring by, in a sense, a voice of all humanity, Jesus is innocent. And Jesus is the incarnate God. You guys, well, that's what you're saying. That's Christianity 101, but just bear with me here for a minute. Thus, Pilate is speaking on behalf of all humanity, and he declares Jesus innocent. Okay, that's not a hard sell. His declaration sets the stage for the crucifixion. I see it all moving in a cohesive sense towards the cross. And then, of course, what follows. Not to be This is not to be justice served. Fellas, in our very conservative way of thinking, justice is a big deal. Justice being served on the cross. We say God's justice was satisfied. Let's look again. His declaration sets the stage for the crucifixions not to be justice served, but rather as a humanity being exposed through injustice. It's not something's going to accomplish between the Godhead. It's the revealing of the injustice, atrocities of us humans, and it's about to happen. Okay, that is the vein of which I look at the cross event. It's revealing injustice, not revealing justice. Pilate, now in the background of this whole thing, now in here, this is again my rendition of this account through Chat GPT and my coaching of the engine to create this. But I really like, I cropped the image and I've got Pilate at the bottom, the official Jewish leaders on the left. Only one of them is shown in this particular cropping. And in the rear, standing in the praetorium, is Jesus, the incarnate God, watching. And he's not only watching, as depicted within the synoptics, but he's interacting with Pilate. That's important. He is not the silent lamb, as it says in Isaiah, but he's the interacting with humanity, God in flesh interacting with humanity and watching all of this unfold. So this we're going to talk about. We talked about Pilate's verdict. Now we're going to move to the background, to the upper right of Jesus of Nazareth. Amid Pilate's verdict, which I find no grounds for at all, and the coming irony of injustice, we're going to see injustice served, not justice. Jesus remains steady. He is steady and solid. Nothing is faking out Jesus here. And he's participating in the dialogue that is going on. He's very much engaged within this event. His interaction is not due to weakness. I want to make that clear. If we had just the synoptics, we could get the idea that God in flesh is holding out, kind of like a Clark Kent. And Clark Kent was a mild-mannered reporter, as it said in the old Superman introduction. Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter, he becomes Superman. And we're sitting around and we're waiting for Jesus to become Superman. And we interpret the resurrection like that. Resurrection is huge. But I think there's a different way to look at this and gain appreciation for what's going on right here. It's not weakness. Jesus is not holding out. Jesus is interacting with humanity. And I believe, I will stand on this one, that this is the revelation of who God is. Jesus is not Clark Kent and will expose God in his power. Jesus of Nazareth is God incarnate right here. And as we engage within this picture right here, we can gain appreciation for the person of God and what is about to occur through the cross. I think that's pretty important. His presence, Jesus' presence, speaks louder than words. God incarnate is bearing witness at this moment to the horrific injustice that we humans tend to create over and over and over again. The injustice that we do to ourselves, the injustice that we do to each other, the injustice that ultimately is going to be revealed of what we do to God, our Creator. This is about injustice. And God Almighty in human flesh is watching this entire thing, participating in it, and watching it unfold. At the same time, Jesus is demonstrating, he is fully engaged, fully aware, but he's fully demonstrating the unending and relentless love of God for humanity, even at this moment when humanity exposes itself at its very worst. I think there is a wonderful aspects of humanity. We could go on and talk about that, but there's also a horrific injustice regarding being human as well. Thus, the human condition, we're seeing it right here. I got to raise this so I can read it. So I've got a note here. Now, this has bearing, this note is a note, of course, it's in yellow, and it's because of how I view the Passion events. It's very important to me, right or wrong, that the Trinity is in union with each other. I don't believe the Trinity was separated at the cross, and I haven't for decades. We are Trinitarian, and I believe the full relationship of what is being shown here is the triune God in full unity, bearing witness to what is true. Jesus is in full relationship, and the Trinity is in full relationship. And what the full relationship is exposing is absolute, relentless love for humanity. So that's a side note. But it has bearing on how I view the cross. So here's our table time. And, you know, like last week, we talked about a lot of different things. And quick summary here. Pilate's declaration of innocence in verse 38b also supported his attempts at release. He's trying to get Jesus released. All of this supports the idea of Pilate's engagement, not dismissal. And that was my first point. At least to some degree. You know, who knows? From this perspective, then, Pilate is not simply a scoffer, where he's depicted as a scoffer in other, through some commentators. Rather, he is a man who hears truth, he recognizes innocence, and publicly acknowledges that innocence. But he also is a man in fear. He's fearful of his reputation, of his job, of his life. In this regard, Pilate represents the collective human condition. That's why I think Pilate is speaking as a representative of the entire human race. out of the confliction that we experience as part of being human. And he's depicting it right here. In the background of this verse and of the image I shared with you is the participating Jesus. Notice the word participating. Fully engaged, fully aware, and watching all of this thing unfold, this drama. You know, in the chosen, they haven't got here yet, have they? It'll be interesting to see how they depict this. That's I'm I really like that series. It'll be probably next year. I'm looking at Jeff. You're nodding, and so I'm kind of watching you as my signal. How does it challenge? Okay, here's the question. Because I'm setting up a conflict here. How does it challenge you to observe the two conflicting realities? And here they are. On one hand, we're observing Pilate as a representative of the universal human condition. And this is held by the minority. And declaring Jesus innocent, but about to yield to fear. Okay, that's Pilate. He's clearly within the text, he thinks Jesus is innocent, but we know the rest of the story, he's going to turn Jesus over because of his own skin. He's yielding because of fear. That's one side, one conflict. The other is the incarnate God participating in this very event. And we're watching the incarnate God absorbing this entirety, the gross injustice, the dialoguing, the posturing, the accusations. And he's not doing it out of defeat, but he's allowing this out of relentless love for humanity. I find this absolutely fascinating. And we'd all like to know what you guys are thinking. Questions, comment. I realize I've had a head start here, but what are your thoughts, fellas, in regard to looking at verse 38 from that perspective? And so feel free to enter in. Oh, Bill, you got your hand.
Well, why am I always first to do this? I'm first in the buffet line and I'm first in the comments.
Because we've learned how to operate as a group, and we're all
Thank
waiting
you.
for you to do it. So,
Well, this of course, I see where you're going. This goes right into the atonement theory, and it just decimates the penal substitutionary atonement theory. And
why
goes,
does it? Well, you said a big word there. I'm sorry, I was rude. I interrupted you, but I want you to.
no, I'll probably butcher it. Basically, the penal says it was justice served, and it was God taking out his vengeance on Jesus, and Jesus because he can take it on our behalf. Well, this one says no. No, this is God being revealed and showing how mankind is from the beginning, and God's a scapegoat. I mean, it's a whole different way to approach the cross, which I don't know how that plays into society, but it sure takes out the down the road of governments, kind of using Jesus as excuses. Hey, God's going to get even with us or something. It takes violence out of the picture.
Well, the need for violence. Well, there's violence in it, but it's all
Or
human created. It's
yeah,
not.
it exposes violence as no, that's not exposes violence as really who we really are. And the question is, are we going to agree with it or not?
Yeah, well, definitely there is the penal substitutionary atonement perspective that is predominant within most of our upbringings, but it's a very small segment of society coming about beginning in around the 12th century. the what I am my I respect that, uh, but I feel there is an alternative way to look at it that actually is embedded within church history from the very, the early church fathers.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not, um, and there are different views within that. You've worked that term, but to me, it's vitally important the Trinity holds together. Otherwise, you get into some really difficulty aspects of who is this God? So you've raised the question, but I think from my perspective, I think we're watching a play or a movie unfolding of the absolute injustice and the horrific possibilities of us humans where we are, that Jesus is about to save us through the cross, not from God's wrath, but from ourselves, rescuing us from ourselves, uh, who is creating all of this difficulty. So that is very
Yeah.
brief.
I
But
have
go ahead
to.
and
I'm sorry
talk.
to interrupt. I have to leave now. I just got a text that uh,
Oh,
Johanna passed away. So
I'm
Oh, Bill.
oh Bill, I'm sorry. Hmm.
Mm,
Oh, that's too bad. Lord, be with our brother
mm.
and his wife. Well, Bill raised that big, the elephant in the room, and then he leaves.
Yeah. Hey,
Well,
Mike,
that's just the way it. I'm sorry. We're sorry he had to go. But other thoughts, fellas.
yeah, Mike, I was just thinking, for me, it really doesn't matter how we portray Pilate in this. That is not a concern for me. What I'm seeing is that Pilate was a tool, I guess, that God used. So you look in the Old Testament, you see that God used Nebuchadnezzar and other evil kings to do his will, to, I don't know if you want to say, teach Israel a lesson or whatever. And what I'm seeing here is that regardless of whether he's engaging or whether he's being flippant or not, that God is in control of this whole thing, that God is using Pilate as a means to bring about the salvation that he had to do through his son, because there was no other means for restoring the relationship of the people, like you said in the bottom one, that he relentlessly loves. So for me, regardless of how Pilate approached this or participated in this, that he was being used by God to bring his plan to fruition. Um, and that whether or not God had malice or what's the word, violence in mind for human beings, what he did was relent and used his son as a substitution for the punishment that we deserve. Um, and that shows his great love for us. So I'm unconcerned with however uh, Pilate approached this whole thing. He was the means that God used to bring about his plan.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. And of course, that raises questions on, well, what is, free will and, that kind of thing. But that's beyond the scope of if we had this a 3-hour discussion, maybe we could go down that. But thanks for your Thanks for your comments. Other comments, fellas?
So see you, I guess in this, I'll say we are. I'll put myself in this because I feel it, so to speak. Um, we are, I'll use your word, grappling with some foundational things here. And I don't know that this really is an answer to your overarching question of challenging us, but it does challenge us. One of the challenges for me is looking at the first statement there to observe Pilate as a representative of the universal human condition. And I can easily allow Pilate his role as that representative. And I think it is representative of sort of, if we look at the column that you have placed in your diagram on the foundation, you know, we probably don't have trouble declaring Jesus innocent, but we have trouble sort of accepting that because, in a sense, Jesus is not only innocent, but to use John Eisner's words, he's come to take over. And do I want to allow him to do that
Right.
To me, if you will? You know, I think that oftentimes is the difficulty that we have in terms of accepting the foundation is we sort of allow ourselves in our own, well, back to free will, our own desire to be in control to keep us from accepting that foundation of Jesus and the kingdom that he intends to bring to us. Where am I going with that? I'm just saying, I think a lot of times our grappling with truth and the foundational part is really a grappling with our own difficulty in allowing Jesus to be Jesus in our lives, allowing God to be God in control.
I thank you, Steve, and I think that's very true. It's certainly true in my own experience. And I know John White and I've just finished a book along with another friend called Gap. And this whole author's premise in Gap is the differential between what we say we believe, our foundation, like you say, what the relentless love, the relentless unconditional love of God, and my personal embracing and living out of that uh, as an experience. And there's a gap. And to put it in the words of John Eisner, allowing him to take control. I have found myself on numerous occasions in life that, yes, Jesus is my savior until I think it's over his head, and I have to take control and use my own means to get me out of whatever the pickle is. And that's exactly what we're seeing Pilate do here. He is in a non-pressure situation. Pilate is probably a rock star, you know, in his administration of governments and so forth. You know, we don't know. He's not, we just know from history. But in times of pressure, when it really comes down, what is it I really believe comes out? And it's usually me taking control. And therein is the problem. That is not I'm not bad. I'm loved by God. I just don't realize it at that time because I feel like I can't trust in Jesus because it's over Jesus's head. This is too big. I need to take control. And that has been, Steve, a lot. I'm really familiar with that scenario. And in my observation, I think most of us, I mean, I think we all grapple with that. So anyway,
Like I know a lot of time teachers don't like the students to read ahead, uh,
you can.
but 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 I kind of leapt forward to 19:8 and following, talking about what Pilate is really like, and getting your references about how John's presentation of this is, shall we say, much more interactive and personable maybe than the Synoptics. But this verse leapt out at me where the Jews had been arguing with him about what Pilate should do and could do and shouldn't do, and he's arguing with them about what their rules and their laws and all the rest of this. And then he said that the Jewish people, the people yelled at him and said Jesus ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was more afraid
Right.
and came back to the praetorium again and asked Jesus some more questions. So, yeah, he's representative of our condition for sure, because sometimes we're in situations and we have to, in a sense, become more afraid before we're really finally ready to listen uh, to what the Lord is telling us. That's what's happening with Pilate here. He's listening, and he gets more and more afraid about his own inadequacy to deal with all the complications that he has.
Hmm.
And he's one of those personalities that it would be fascinating to write a story. Obviously, it would have to be fiction because we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah.
But exactly in depth, really, not politically just, but overall, what happened to Pilate after
Hmm.
the crucifixion? I mean, there's historical annals about what happened to his governorship and all the rest of that. Well, what happened to the man Pilate after this?
Well,
Be fascinating thing to write.
he, I don't know firsthand. I've heard secondhand he got fired eventually because he was just too ruthless.
Yeah,
I don't know, but we'll get to that, John, in just a few weeks. Actually, my mind has gone to Paul's experience. Now, he's a different individual than Pilate. Paul was a outside the faith, had a radical conversion and interaction with the Christ, and it turned him upside down, turned his world upside down. But in Romans, his treatise, that major book he wrote, in Romans 7, he's talking about this very conflict that we see depicted by Pilate, where that which I would not, in King James, that do I do. And it is something we all know. It is flat out apparent to all of public that Jesus is innocent. But because of the pressures that he is allowing to happen within him, that he's going to choose very poorly and send Jesus to the gallows. And in that case, he's a representative of all of our experience. Paul talks about it. Yes, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I got two questions, Mike, and first one's for you. How would you say Jesus demonstrates the love of God? You said this a couple times in here that
Yeah, my understanding at this moment is the love of God is being demonstrated through forbearance, through holding back, through patience, through allowing the other to have to go through what they have to go through before salvation, before deliverance can happen. And that takes a tremendous amount of self awareness and of empathy towards the other. The other has to go through what they have to go through before, or they will never get it. I know that. There are things in my life I had to go through. Um, Almost experiencing bankruptcy, which was a very difficult time in my life, but I had to go through it. And I'm glad I went through it, although I wouldn't want to go through it again. And I think the same thing is happening here. God incarnate is watching his loved creation going through the injustice and the horrific actions that they have to go through before they can be delivered. And that's how I'd answer that.
Hmm. Okay. I'm not sure I still get the connection of how Jesus watching in the picture is demonstrating God's love for us,
Well,
unless.
let me get another example. We all know the story of the prodigal son. We all know that. It's one of the most famous stories in the Bible. And when the wayward son was rebellious from the very beginning. And the father gave the son his inheritance. The father allowed the the son to go away to what is called in scripture the far country, and the son had to go through the the crumbling and the eating of the pods before he came to his senses. That's exactly the same thing, and that's where I see the love of God in the prodigal son and what's happening right here. God incarnate is functioning at that level right here.
Okay. Um, I get it, but I still don't get, I'm trying to get your take on it. And as we know from the book we read, the Wood Between the Worlds, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. But as you did on your model, there is an objective truth, and which is the foundation as opposed to subjective truth. So maybe the big question in life for all of us is, what is truth? And Pilate, it seems, they had that dialogue that we've been talking about. Jesus says, "Hey, my kingdom's not of this world." And then he goes into, the truth thing we did last week, I think. And you said that Jesus actually made the statement that he was the way, the truth, and the life, that he was truth, a person. I think that's what you said, which is quoting from John 14. Um, so they're having this conversation about truth. And then I think we're like Pilate. We engage in the conversation a little bit. And then we ask the question and then we walk away. We don't end the conversation. It's too heady a thing for me. I don't know. I don't get it. It seems to me that Jesus asked his disciples off and on, and maybe the reason for the signs was he would ask his disciples, "Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that who do the people say I am?" And so this acknowledgement, this is the end. So Jesus has just gone through in the last 24 hours the most incredible celebration of the Passover meal. And he started his journey with John the Baptist saying, "Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world." And his favorite name for himself in the book of Revelation is the Lamb of God, which, right, it's just interesting, right? Especially from our perspective. But it says, "Who do you say that I am?" And this idea of truth, and us knowing the truth, it it's more than Jesus being a model, I think. There's something else going on here. The end will come for all of us. And the question may be, what have we done with the truth? What have we been willing to deal with reality in life? Or it's kind of like, I love to use the example of, I think our faith journey is a lot like marriage, right? So we want to be married to God. We want to have this incredible relationship. But on the other hand, we want to be married and have all the benefits of it, but we don't want to be married. We want to do it our way. And so we go through this incredible relationship where one day it's good, and then the other day we're off doing it our way. And the relentless love of God is like Hosea, is this incredible love that God keeps demonstrating. But there was something bigger going on. You used the example of the prodigal son, and I would say, so what did the prodigal son say when he came to his senses? And the words, I believe, out of his mouth were, he looks to heaven and say, God in heaven, I've sinned against you. And right, and there's this sin problem that I think in today we want to just ignore, and say that all I need is God to help me become better, to help. God, you've been a good model, and I'm going to try that. Oh, this death on the cross thing. Well, I know I got to die to myself. If I want to have a good relation with my wife, I got to die in a sense, right? And listen. And so there's all these nuggets of truth, but I think it misses the big truth that God was willing to pay the price, the ultimate sacrifice, a blood sacrifice that is throughout the Old Testament, right? The fulfillment of that so that we could be free from this sin condition and to engage in life. But what is truth, And I think we may be held responsible for how we deal with that.
Could be. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. That was good. Good words.
And Bob, yes, thanks, John. And Bob, do you want to continue that? And do you want to continue to talk?
Yeah, I think that's just a good overview of what's going on. I keep remembering that the Godhead, all three of the Godhead, are omniscient. They knew all of this was going to play out, and so we're just trying to grapple with what does it all mean. And I just appreciated John's summarizing what I believe it means, and so that's all I would add to this.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Well, just let me close because we've got to close here. But yes, John, I agree that in the end game, we all do, according to my understanding of the scriptures, we all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And I think it's going to have a lot of bearing on what I did with what I have. And when we go to truth, I think it's really good to think about, well, what part of this is true and what part is it my own experience, what I think is true. We have an imagery through the words of Jesus of what is very important, and it has bearing on what you're saying. And on a couple times in scripture, what is the greatest commandment? Is that you love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself. That's a great place to start. We and I'm saying we broadly, how we treat other people is extremely important to Jesus. Within our context, we haven't seen that mirrored. We're seeing holes in that right now in our I know you want to talk, John. Just bear with me. We're seeing holes in that, but I think that that is a good place to start thinking about what is truth. And from there, we can go from there. John, one quick statement, and then we're gonna stop. So
Yeah, I'll make this quick. Yesterday, I was up in Rocky Mountain National Park, a little like heaven, right? And of course, we don't have cell service up there. And I got a voice message from my brother. Now, my brother went to the hospital last night. Now, just real quick. So, for a year or so, I've been saying I'd like to have hospice conversations with men before they get in hospice. And what I really mean by that is, it's not that you got to get in hospice. Bill's sister-in-law it was in hospice. But so I had this friend, Ralph, and Ralph had got diagnosed with cancer about a year ago in the spring. And then December last year, he decided he wasn't going to do the chemo anymore. It wasn't working. It was more bad than good. And I think I shared with you guys before, he just had this uncanny peace about him when you would talk with him. Now, shortly after that, my brother-in-law went through some big medical stuff, and he would say, "Oh, don't worry, I know where I'm going when I die." And it was more of an objective belief, right? And then shortly after that, my brother, who had a kidney taken out a month ago with kidney cancer, so he said the same thing. And my observation from my point of view was both my brother-in-law and my brother were saying something they believed. My friend Ralph was saying something he believed, but there was this uncanny, and the couple times we chatted before he died, this uncanny peace about him. Now, about a week ago, I had an hour-long conversation with my brother. We do Zoom calls with the family every 3 weeks. I had this long conversation with my brother because the cancer that they took out had spread, had come back. And by the time we finished talking, don't ask me what we talked about, and I keep it short anyway. He had this peace about him. He may be looking death in the eye. My sister in a conversation yesterday, and the people in the family think he's ready to go home. But you know what? I would have said 2 months ago he was ready intellectually. And I would say in the last month, there's this peace about him. He has a peace. He said, "Tell everybody not to worry." He said, "I know where I'm going." But it was different than before. Now, this just could be my observation. But in the end, Jesus, we're going to be like this Pilate thing, right? And it's like, okay, what have you done with the life I've given you? What do you believe? What do you really, I know you're married and you're happily married, but what do you really believe? What is really, the essence of this connection, right? And so pray for Bill today. It's a hard day for him, but it's just, we're talking about something here, which I think is extremely important. And there are different ways to look at it. But the question is, as we're all kind of in the fourth quarter, are we ready to deal with what's next and what is true?
thank you, John. Yeah, thanks for ending that.
Words.
Yes, and we want to, Lord, be with our brother Bill today and his family. We give thanks, fellas. Thank you all for joining. We'll meet next week. I'll be here. It's October 1st. We're in the last quarter. Truly spoken. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you more later. Bye for now.